All right. Well, thank you so much, Paul, and thank you so much, Elizabeth, for organizing today. I'm hugely appreciative of being able to be part of PostGIS Day this year. And I will be talking about some of the work that Felt does. Felt is a company I work at. I'll be telling you a little bit about it and doing a bit of a demo, which is always risky, but we're going to try it anyway. So, a little bit about myself. I lead the data products team here at Felt. I've been doing that since about early 2022, so coming up on 2.5 years here at the company. We're a fairly young company, so that's actually quite early in the history of Felt. Previously, I worked at Meta for several years, where my team worked on what eventually became the Overture Maps Foundation at Linux Foundation. And then before that, a whole cluster of stuff around mapping, open source, geographic government data, visualization stuff at organizations like Remix, MapZen, Code for America for several years, and then Stamen for lots of years before that. So kind of a deep-ish history in open source geospatial stuff. So today I'm going to be talking about kind of three big things. One is just a really high-level introduction to Felt. Two, how Felt and PostGIS go together. And then finally, I'll be doing a live demo, clicking around in my browser and showing off the application, how it works, and how to integrate and talk to PostGIS with it. So, introduction to Felt. We like to call ourselves a modern cloud-native GIS. We can talk to data from lots of databases, lots of data formats. You can drag and drop files into Felt. You can connect databases to Felt. You can integrate stuff from a wide variety of places outside. But where I think our special sauce is the collaboration and teamwork. So being able to do cross-organization collaboration from anywhere via our browser-based GIS, and then making it so that teams could use GIS in order to make decisions faster. And that sounds very marketing-y, so I'll kind of dig into what we mean by that and why it's interesting and fun. We are used by a whole bunch of different organizations out there. Companies like Turo, Lime, SkySafe, and Lyft all use us. And these are companies that typically have fairly advanced and very skilled GIS folks internally who've chosen to use our platform to integrate with some of their internal data systems. And then we also are built upon a lot of things from the open source ecosystem. So obviously, PostGIS and PostGIS are what we're talking about today, but we've also been longtime kind of promoters and supporters of things like Protomaps, Brandon Liu's big project for several years, reinventing some of the way maps are hosted and presented. Tippecanoe, we support directly by employing Erica Fisher, who is the creator of Tippecanoe, a server-side tiling library originally created at Mapbox, but now hosted by and supported by Felt. It's a really core aspect of the work that we do. And then we are, I think, on either year 2 or 3, I can't remember where we're at with this, but we are one of the flagship supporters, sustaining members of QGIS. So the open source tech stack is something that's really important to us and something that we support directly, either financially or as employers, as well as just using in our work and in our products. But digging into the kind of more post-GIS Day content, the data integration is really something that we've been developing over the course of the past several years here at Felt, and I think I'm going to kind of dig into that a little bit more. And we support a lot of these different external databases like Snowflake, BigQuery, Amazon, Esri Feature Server, yada, yada, yada. But PostGIS is probably the main one. Whenever we talk to our customers and our users, Postgres and PostGIS are the ones that are really at the top of the list, especially in folks who are interested in using new kinds of open source stacks and new kinds of modern GIS stacks in the browser. And we think that the two work really well together. So in terms of where PostGIS fits for our customers, one of the big things that we see is that it is the authoritative data store. It's the place where the real data lives, where the actual information comes from, and where other things look to for the reality and the currency of the data that they're looking at. The other thing that we see is that PostGIS and Postgres are really there for analysis and data engineering. So large scale data movement processes, various kinds of pipelines and things. Essentially, PostGIS is the place where a lot of that high-end analysis and data engineering is happening. It doesn't make sense to think about it as living someplace else. So might be wondering, what does Felt actually add to this picture? And in the demo, I'll be talking about some of the key things that Felt adds to PostGIS. But the really kind of core of it is, one, it allows you to pull in geospatial data from a place like PostGIS and share it on the web. Two, we have a lot of fairly advanced visualization tools to investigate and communicate what's in that data to collaborators, to other people, to team members. And then finally, there's something that we think is fairly unique to Felt, which is collaboration directly via the map. And I'll dig into what this looks like during the demo. So at this point, I'm going to share my browser and take a big risk. And hopefully everything continues to work when I switch back to Felt. Great. Okay. So when you open up a brand new map in Felt, you're presented with a fairly generic blank slate. And what we're going to be talking about is how to start to pull data into this from PostGIS. So I have prepared a database and populated it with a bunch of information from an online service called Carbon Mapper. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose PostGIS. Carbon Mapper Live is going to be my connection. Oops, do some paste gumbo from elsewhere. There we go. And I'll make it just for me for right now. So Carbon Mapper, while this connects, is a really fascinating online service that uses remote sensing and aerial imagery, and most recently a new sensor from Planet Labs called Tanager, in order to map the location of plumes of both methane and carbon dioxide around the world. And they turned those into geospatial data. Here's a little preview on the left showing what the data looks like, and I'm just going to go ahead and add it to my map here. So while that comes in, that'll take just a few seconds to pop up. And what we're going to see is points all around the country and beyond where Tanager and some of their other aerial sensors have picked up plumes of potentially greenhouse gases being emitted by different kinds of industrial and agricultural and other facilities around the world. So this layer should come in here in just a second, 92%, and hopefully that'll pop up as I'm finishing this sentence. There it is. So pretty basic stuff, points on a map, nothing really special here. Worth doing a little tip of the hat to Tippecanoe here. For those of you who haven't worked with it, Tippecanoe is the backend tiling service that we use to make it reasonable to show these millions of points on a map in a dynamic and interactive way. But just looking at points on a map is not hugely interesting on its own. So I'm going to use some of the visualization functionality of Felt in order to make this comprehensible to somebody. So one thing that I think I'll be interested in is maybe what is the actual emissions that are being represented by these points? And if I look at an individual one, I can see that there's this emission property on each point, which I know from looking at the data beforehand that this is kilograms of gas being released into the atmosphere. So maybe I will add an initial component that is literally just a total emissions stat. So I'm going to go here, total emissions. I'm going to say that I would like the sum, and I want the sum of the emissions, and I want to give it sort of a nice-ish looking integer value. And so right away, I can see just very broadly overall in the entire data set that there's something like 162 million kilograms of various kinds of gases being emitted into the atmosphere from all of these different facilities in the data set. So that's kind of cool. I know that there's gases there, but I'm actually kind of curious to know more about what kind of gases those are. So I'm going to keep adding additional components. And the next component I want to add is a bar chart. And here I want to know what kinds of gas types are being emitted. So I know that the system has two kinds. CH4 for methane, or CO2 for carbon dioxide. And I don't just want the number of points, I actually want the sum of the emission, so that I can see a little bit more about how these different gases are being measured and contributing to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So right away, I can see that of the things that Carbon Mapper is mapping, clearly CO2 is the big one. 160 million of those kilograms of the 162 million kilograms are CO2. But we know that Tanager, the new satellite from Planet, is actually optimized for tracking methane, among other things. So we expect to see the kilograms of methane start to increase over time. Some other things in there, we know that there is a time component to this from having looked at the data. So I can maybe look at time series, and I want to know something about when each of these points was most recently seen. So I might say, let's go last seen, and let's go to the timestamp max, and let's do it interval by, I don't know, month or year. Month is a little bit too small, so I'm just going to stick with by year here. And so now I can start to see and maybe even manipulate which ones I'm looking at. So clicking around here, expanding and contracting this view, I can get a little bit more detail and information about where and when over time each of these different plumes has been somehow seen by an aerial image sensor. And then last thing that I want to do before I start moving on is, these dots are kind of boring. So maybe I want to do something a little bit more interesting here with visualizing this stuff. So I'm just going to give the layer name of plumes, and I'm going to start styling it. And in particular, what I want to do is I want to do a color range style. I want to color by the persistence, which is a 0 to 1 value. And I want to make it look dramatic. More persistent is going to be redder in the case of this map. So persistence is how Carbon Mapper talks about plumes that they see repeatedly. So if they come back day after day, they task these satellites or they task these aerial imagery collectors, do they see those same plumes over time, or do the plumes reduce over time or disappear? Basically, are they frequent or are they infrequent? Persistence, the way that they measure it has kind of a denominator problem. You can imagine that if they only see one of these things once, it kind of looks like 100% persistence. So I'm going to add a fourth component here, which is just going to be a filter. And what I want to filter by is the observed count, how often these things have been seen. And I want to click on observation date count, make this a slider. And then what I can do with that is I can start to reduce it. And I can say, okay, only things that have been seen maybe twice. So you can see that as I move this around, it kind of trims the number of points down, because what I'm trying to do is to filter out the ones that have just been sort of seen once and have a kind of false persistence of 100. So if they've been seen twice or more, maybe that's better information, or maybe there's something a little bit more meaningful about the persistence of those values. This is where things start to get interesting, though, because I've created this map for myself, and this is a fairly basic exercise in creating a simple visualization online. But maybe I've got colleagues, maybe I want to do something with this information. Maybe I want to cause somebody to act on it, or get some sort of feedback about it. So where things get fun and interesting with Felt is that we can start to really take advantage of the fact that this is a web page and share it with people. So maybe what I want to do is I want to make it so that anyone in the public can view and comment. I can also do this for team members. I can make it editable, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to make this a public link. And I'm going to go ahead and open up a private browser window where I'm not logged in, and demonstrate what it looks like to share this map with somebody who's maybe outside of my immediate team or elsewhere in an organization. So this is the public view, and I'm seeing all of those dynamic components that I created. But now I'm playing the part of somebody who's maybe an external viewer who's got some sort of interest in this and maybe wants to direct attention here. So one thing that I've been sort of hovering around is this big cluster here in southeast New Mexico and western Texas of a lot of points. We see points showing plumes and industry all around the country, but there's very clearly a giant blob here, and maybe there's something interesting about that. For those of you familiar with geology, you'll know that this is something called the Permian Basin, which is where a lot of natural gas, I believe, drilling and other kinds of oil operations happen due to the particular geology and kind of deep historical carbon that's located under the ground there. So as a kind of viewer, maybe I'm interested in a few of these points. I can see there's some clusters here, but I see that there's this high persistence one kind of hanging out here on the 62 highway. So as a viewer, maybe I can go in there and maybe say, what is this? Can we learn more? And post that as a comment. And that maybe draws the attention. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this private window. And back to myself as the map creator, I could see that viewer's comment that was left here. And clearly there's some sort of interest in something around whatever facility is here. I want to learn a little bit more about it. I'm curious now, as somebody who's had their attention drawn to this, to bring in other data to it. So, maybe what I'd like to do is to get more information from Carbon Mapper. So switching really quickly back into PostGIS, one of the things that I know is that I can add a link URL directly to Carbon Mapper. And I remember from looking at this data before that if I take the ID on this table and create a link URL with data.carbonmapper.org attached to it and go ahead and update that table, now I can go back to data, go ahead and refresh this from the database, let that churn, and start to create this kind of interactive pop-up that's actually going to give me potentially more information about the source of carbon here. So I'm just going to let that churn for a couple of seconds there. Shortly, it'll pull all the data in and hopefully will include the link URL I just added. That really quick. Just for the elevator music plays. 94%. There we go. Okay, so that finished. And now what I have here is a clickable link at the very bottom. And this is fun. This is where I go into the actual carbonmapper.org website, which they've lovingly created using the Mapbox API and brought in some actual raster data that gives a little bit of meaning to some of the plume data that just look like kind of arbitrary points here. And now I can start to do perhaps a bigger investigation into what this point is. So maybe I want to screen cap what I've shown here, and I want to bring it in to, whoops, lost my screen cap. I'll try that again. Maybe I want to bring it into Felt as a dragged in image. So pull that in, drop it on my Felt map, and now I've got a little bit of information that maybe provides some context to what that link is showing. Or I want to zoom in on Google Maps and go into Carlsbad, New Mexico, in order to get more information about maybe some of the street location that place is on. So maybe I'll pull in here and look at what the facility looks like. I believe it's this thing. Same deal here. Go ahead, screen cap, go back to Felt, drop it in, and provide a little bit of extra information. And then finally, Felt has a whole bunch of really cool drawing and markup tools. So maybe I'll drop a pin on this and say, interesting facility with a little star icon to indicate that there's something interesting about that. Maybe I am overall interested in what's happening here in the Western Permian Basin. So I'm doing a little bit of additional drawing on top of that in order to demonstrate something about what the data is that's interesting here, and then passing it on to my colleagues or using this to create a further on map. So I've drawn a little bit of detail. I've added a little bit of kind of on the ground information from other sources with these screen caps. And now perhaps I'd like to embed this on a web page or share this someplace. So the last part of the Felt demo that I'm going to do is essentially what happens when you want to share this further. So here I can go to embed. I want to make it a web page rather than an iframe. Maybe I'd like to do a little bit of branding on this. So I'll pull in the Carbon Mapper logo because that's where I put in, that's where I got the information. And then I call this Carlsbad facility and copy my link. Now, if I open up a private window where I'm some member of the public who's looking at this, I can see that same map I was seeing earlier, but now there's additional information there. There's some screenshots, there's some focus that I put in via the marking tool, and some ability to kind of draw people's attention and draw people's interest into particular aspects of this map. So that's the demo portion. I'm going to switch back to my slides here, wrap up the demo, and just talk a bit about kind of what some of the things are that we showed here. So in this case, PostgreSQL is still the authoritative data store. There's a points table in there with IDs and other information that I ingested from Carbon Mapper that is my source of truth. I was doing some analysis and data engineering to get it there initially. Truly simple data engineering, just scraping it from a website, but still you can imagine that kind of representing something a little bit bigger or more data intensive. And then with Felt is where we started to be able to pull that in, share it on the web, use all those visualization tools that Felt provides in order to investigate something about that data, communicate something about that data, and then collaborate with other people directly using map URLs. And again, we don't think that there's really anything else in the industry that does this collaboration part nearly as effectively. A lot of business intelligence tools exist out there, but where Felt really shines is that kind of Google Google Docs style interaction via comments, via conversation, via feedback, and via shared work on the same map together. So zooming back out, Felt is a commercial product. We have an enterprise plan alongside other plans that gives you many of the things that are listed on this slide. Enterprise features like live data syncs. So everything that I showed you, but updated on an hourly or nightly basis. Custom dashboards and interactive widgets. All kinds of ways to embed stuff, white label it, different kinds of enterprise stuff like SAML and single sign-on for large teams. And then essentially just a whole bunch of other stuff that really allows for this kind of team-based functionality, like regional scaling, VPC deployment, et cetera, for those of you that are interested in that sort of thing. One other really fun thing that I didn't get into, but if you're the kind of person who enjoys going a little bit further than what the GUI would provide, building custom apps, working with the JavaScript environments that browsers provide, we have a full JavaScript SDK that we just launched within the past month or two. So everything that I showed is something that can be customized, embedded, put onto other pages, and essentially operationalized into a kind of more advanced sharing system than just the one that our basic tools I demoed provide. So that's what I've got. Thank you so much to Elizabeth. Thank you so much to Paul. If you have any questions, feel free to email me directly. That's me, mike@felt.com. Or if you just want to talk to sales, felt.com/sales is who you can talk to. I really appreciate the chance to talk at PostGIS Day, and in particular, bringing a bit of a commercial product, which I know is not always the typical talk here. So thanks so much, folks.
Well, thank you very much for coming and sharing. So we got a few questions from the audience. First one, what are the main differences between Felt and Mapbox?
Yeah, huge differences between Felt and Mapbox. Probably the main one is one way to think about Felt is that it's a tool for end users, maybe data analysts or people for whom the data is the kind of core part of their work, and then sharing it is a activity they want to do. Mapbox is more, focused on things like developer audiences. So the strength of Mapbox has always been in people who want to create applications or develop new, entirely custom experiences, like the Carbon Mapper one that I linked to, which was developed via Mapbox. So really different audiences.
Yeah. Anita Grazer has a question. Do you have European hosting ready yet?
Yes, we do. We have regional hosting set up for enterprise customers. There's, I believe, 5 regions you can choose from, and there's 2 European locations. There's one in the EU in Frankfurt, and then there's another one in the UK in London.
And one more question from Bill O'Donnell. You mentioned the JavaScript SDK. Is the actual rendering engine custom, or is that a layer on top of some existing system?
Uh, think the best way to answer that question is that we use MapLibre very heavily.
Mm.
For those of you, I don't know if MapLibre has come up in other talks, but it's essentially a fork of the open source Mapbox SDK that was launched a couple of years ago by Yuri Ostrikhan and several other developers. So we use MapLibre extremely heavily in Felt.
And then I have some questions about the PostGIS integration, because there's that sort of like that grinding period in between saying, show me my PostGIS data and seeing the PostGIS data. And I'm assuming that that's the points flowing through Tippecanoe.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So Tippecanoe creates a PM tiles file behind the scenes, which makes the interactions really fast, but it leads to a few seconds of grinding there. It's a bit of a constant time grinding. We've found that for very large data sets, it doesn't take much longer than very slow data sets.
Okay.
And then, of course, if you have it set up as a live integration, you don't really see the grind. You just wake up in the morning to a new data set.
Yeah, so that's the other thing I was going to ask. Like, if this is my production database, presumably I'm working on it and it's changing, like, what is the frequency of my map being updated relative to my working data?
Yeah, that's settable. You can click the refresh button if you specifically want it to be refreshed at a particular time, like I did in the demo, or you can click the like live toggle when you ingest it, and then just tell us how often you want it. I believe the highest frequency is either 15 minutes or 1 hour. I forget which of those we chose, but a more typical use case might be like overnight updates.
Cool. Is there any facility in Felt for editing the source data?
Uh, Not in the sense of pushing back to PostGIS.
Mhm.
We're really interested in that, and we're sort of seeing some demand pop up from it. But initially, a lot of the demand was much more about reflecting an authoritative source rather than directly modifying it. But we do have a lot of those, marker and kind of editing tools in the foreground that are used for the kind of foreground data editing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming and joining us and sharing PostGIS Day and sharing Felt. It's been great watching Felt develop, and can't wait to see what you guys do next.
All right. Thanks so much, Paul, and thank you, Elizabeth, and really appreciate the chance to talk to everybody. And I'll stay online and kind of follow along with some of their talks.